Most people think Japanese engines die because of bad luck, or because the owner bought cheap oil, or because the car hit high mileage and that was just the end of the road. That is not what usually kills them. What quietly destroys a lot of Japanese engines happens long before 200,000 miles. Long before the check engine light. Long before the smoke. Long before the expensive diagnosis. It happens in the first few minutes after startup. That is the trap. Because the habits people think are taking care of the engine are often the exact habits doing the damage. The long warm-up, the first hard rev, the short commute every day, the cold morning routine that feels harmless because the car still runs. That is how engines get worn out without owners realizing they are doing it. So in this video, I want to break down the cold start habits that are quietly shaving years off Japanese engines. Some of these habits are incredibly common. Some of them are actually recommended by people who mean well. And a couple of them are things owners do every single morning thinking they are protecting the car. They are not. They are doing the opposite. And the first one is probably going to start an argument. Number one, the long warm-up idle that is doing more harm than good. This is one of the oldest habits in car culture. Start the car, let it sit. Wait 5 minutes, maybe 10, maybe even longer if it is freezing outside. To a lot of owners, that feels responsible. It feels gentle. It feels like you are giving the engine time to wake up. That logic made a lot more sense decades ago. Older carbureted cars really did behave differently in cold weather. They needed help stabilizing. They needed time. Modern Japanese engines do not work like that. Fuel injection changed the game. The engine computer already knows the coolant temperature, intake temperature, and startup conditions. It adjusts the fuel mixture on its own. So when you leave the car sitting there idling for a long time, you are not helping it the way people think. You are forcing the engine to run rich while it produces very little useful heat. That means extra fuel during the exact part of engine operation where you want clean lubrication, not excess gasoline washing around the cylinders. And because the engine is barely under any load, it warms up painfully slowly. That is the part most people miss. Idling feels gentle, but gentle is not always better. The engine reaches proper operating temperature much faster when you drive it lightly, because now it is actually doing work. That is when real heat builds. That is when the oil starts getting where it needs to be. That is when the engine begins stabilizing the way it was designed to. A brief pause after startup is fine. A long driveway warm-up every morning is not helping the way you think it is. And speaking of cold start mistakes, this next one is even worse because it adds stress at the exact wrong time. Number two, revving the engine right after startup. This is one of the fastest ways to abuse an engine without realizing it. You start the car on a cold morning and instantly blip the throttle. Maybe you like hearing it. Maybe you are in a rush. Maybe you think a quick rev helps clear it out. What it really does is load the engine before the lubrication system is ready. When a Japanese engine sits overnight, the oil drains back down into the pan. That means the parts at the top of the engine, the valve train, the cams, the upper passages, are not fully coated the way they are once the oil is circulating normally. The moment you start the car, oil pressure begins building, but it is not everywhere instantly. It takes time to move through the system. That time is short, but it matters. Those first seconds are some of the most sensitive seconds in the entire life of the engine. So if you start revving immediately, you are increasing load, increasing friction, and demanding performance before the engine has stabilized. And when the engine is cold, everything is working under less than ideal conditions. The metal clearances are different. The oil is thicker. The piston-to-cylinder relationship is not where it will be once everything reaches temperature. That is why cold revving is such a bad habit. It feels small, it sounds harmless, but repeated over months and years, it adds up. And if you own a turbocharged Japanese car, this matters even more. Turbo engines are far less forgiving when cold because now you are adding boost, extra heat, and extra pressure into an engine that has not reached proper operating conditions. That is exactly how expensive damage starts. not always in one dramatic moment, often through repeated small abuse that owners never think twice about. And this next habit is something almost nobody talks about, even though it affects how the engine starts in the first place. Number 3, not waiting for the fuel system to prime before cranking. This one is simple, but it matters. When you turn the key to the on position, or on a push-button car, when you press the button without your foot on the brake, the fuel pump usually runs briefly to build pressure. That short buzz from the back of the car is not random. That is the system getting ready. It is making sure fuel is available at the correct pressure when the engine starts. When owners rush straight from completely off to instant cranking, they skip that short prime cycle. On a newer car in perfect condition, the difference may be small. On an older Japanese car, especially one where fuel pressure bleeds off a little overnight, it can matter more than people expect. Skipping the prime can mean longer cranking, weaker starts, more strain on the starter, more demand on the battery, and a less controlled startup. It is not dramatic. It is not some giant engine killer by itself, but it is exactly the kind of tiny habit that improves the whole cold start process when you do it right. Turn it on. Wait a moment. Let the car set itself up. Then start. That is it. And the next one is where a lot of owners make a huge mistake because they hear a warning and decide to ignore it. Number 4, dismissing cold start noises that are trying to tell you something. Not every cold start rattle means disaster. That part is true. Some engines make a brief noise and go quiet. Some sounds are common. Some are annoying but not immediately catastrophic. The problem is that too many owners hear a noise, decide it is just one of those things, and then keep driving until the problem grows teeth. That is how a warning becomes a major repair. Japanese engines are generally excellent, but they still have known weak points depending on the brand, engine family, and year. A brief cold start rattle in one engine may point toward a variable valve timing issue. In another, it may hint at timing-related wear. In another, it may suggest oil pressure is not reaching something properly during startup. That is why startup noises matter. They are one of the few moments when certain weaknesses reveal themselves clearly. The engine sits overnight, oil drains back, the system goes cold, then the startup exposes how healthy or unhealthy certain components really are. If you hear a consistent rattle, chain noise, or odd clatter at cold start, do not do what most owners do, which is wait for it to become undeniable. Because by then, the repair is almost always worse. That is the pattern. Small signal ignored, big bill later. And this next mistake is probably the most deceptive one on the entire list, because it tricks owners into thinking the engine is already warm. Number 5, driving hard just because the coolant gauge moved. This one fools people every day. You start driving, and after a couple of minutes, the temperature needle starts moving off cold. That makes a lot of owners think, okay, we're good now. Not even close. Coolant warms up faster than oil. That is the key difference. Your dash gauge is usually telling you about coolant temperature, not oil temperature. And oil is what your internal moving parts are depending on for protection. So the gauge might be moving, the cabin heat might start working, and the engine might feel normal, while the oil is still lagging behind. That means the engine can look ready before it is actually ready. This is where people make the mistake of merging hard, flooring it, or pulling high RPM within the first few minutes of driving. That is exactly the wrong moment to ask for maximum effort, because although the engine may feel smoother than it did at startup, it still is not fully stabilized internally. The oil is still warming. The clearances are still settling. And if you own a turbocharged engine, the turbo itself is depending on oil that may still be too cold and too thick to protect it properly under load. That is why the right cold start routine is not just about idling less. It is about driving gently longer, not forever, just long enough for the engine to reach the conditions it was designed for. Light throttle, lower RPM, no sudden hard pulls. That simple discipline makes a huge difference over time. If you are getting value from this so far, subscribe right now because this channel is built for Japanese car owners who want to avoid expensive mistakes, make smarter maintenance decisions, and get more life out of the cars they already own. Now let's get into one of the most expensive modern problems, because this one is quietly hitting a lot of owners who think their short commute is harmless. Number 6. Short trip driving that fuels dilution from the inside. This is a massive issue in certain modern direct injection engines, and most owners have never even heard the phrase fuel dilution until something already feels wrong. Here is what makes it so sneaky. On a cold start, the engine runs richer. That is normal. Direct injection systems spray fuel directly into the combustion chamber, and under cold conditions, some of that fuel can end up where you do not want it, washing down the cylinder walls and slipping past the rings into the oil. If the engine then gets fully hot and stays hot long enough, a lot of that contamination can eventually burn off through normal operating conditions. But if your life is made up of short drives, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, back home, then off again later, the oil never gets hot enough for long enough to clean itself out. That is where the problem builds. A little fuel mixes in, then more, then more. Now the oil is thinner than it should be. Now it is protecting the engine less effectively. Now wear starts increasing even though the owner believes they are barely driving the car. And that is the cruel irony. The owner thinks low mileage means low wear. But repeated cold starts and short trips can be much harder on an engine than a long, easy highway drive. This issue became especially well known in certain small turbocharged engines, but the broader principle matters across multiple direct injection setups. Short trip life is hard on oil. That is the truth. The fix is not complicated. Give the car a proper longer drive regularly. Let the oil get fully hot. Shorten oil intervals if your driving pattern is mostly cold starts and short trips. Treat your real driving conditions honestly instead of pretending your car lives an easy life just because the odometer climbs slowly. And this next mistake takes several of these problems and combines them into one bad habit. Number 7, remote starting and letting the car idle forever every winter morning. I understand why people do this. Nobody wants to sit in a freezing cabin. Nobody likes scraping frost while the car is ice cold. Remote start feels convenient. And used briefly, it can be. The problem is when owners turn it into a daily 10 to 15-minute idling ritual. Now you are combining cold-rich operation, slow heat buildup, extra fuel wash, more dilution risk, and an engine that is spending a huge amount of time running in a state that is far from ideal. That is the worst part of long remote starts. They feel high-tech and responsible, but mechanically they are often just a more comfortable version of the old, long warm-up mistake. And on top of that, aftermarket remote start systems can introduce their own issues depending on installation quality. Bad wiring work, spliced harnesses, electrical gremlins, all of that becomes possible when the system is installed poorly. So the smarter move is simple. If you use remote start, keep it short. Take the edge off the cabin, clear visibility, then drive gently. Do not treat remote start like a replacement for proper warm-up through light driving. It is not. And finally, let's end with one of the most overlooked cold start mistakes of all, because this one begins before you even turn the key. Number 8, using the wrong oil viscosity and making cold starts harder than they need to be. A lot of owners still think thicker oil automatically means better protection. That sounds logical on the surface. It is not always true in modern Japanese engines. Most of these engines are designed with tight tolerances and specific oil flow requirements. They need the correct viscosity so the oil can move quickly during the exact time it matters most, startup. If the oil is too thick for what the engine was designed to use, it takes longer to reach critical components and longer to establish the protection the system expects. That is not what you want during the most sensitive seconds of operation, and that is why following the specified oil grade matters so much. Not because engineers like making life difficult, because the lubrication strategy of the engine depends on it. Wrong oil choice can make startup noisier, timing systems less responsive, and cold operation less protected than it should be. This is especially important in engines with variable valve timing systems, fine oil passages, and components that rely on quick oil delivery right after startup. Use what the engine calls for, not what somebody online claims is better, not what a quick lube shop wants to dump in because it is what they have the most of, what the engine was designed around. So when you step back, the entire cold start routine really comes down to something very simple. Do not let the car sit there forever. Do not rev it immediately. Give the fuel system a moment to prime. Start the engine. Wait briefly while you buckle up and settle in. Then drive gently. Stay light on the throttle. Keep the RPM reasonable. Give the oil time to catch up to the coolant. And once a week, if your driving is mostly short trips, take the car on a proper longer drive so the oil gets fully hot and stays there long enough to do what it needs to do. That is it. No miracle product, no magic additive, no secret mechanic trick, just a smarter first 10 minutes. And those first 10 minutes matter far more than most owners realize, because Japanese engines usually do not die from one dramatic mistake. They die from repeated small habits that owners were told were normal. If you stop those habits, you give the engine a completely different life. If you want the next video, I'll break down the maintenance habits that help Japanese engines quietly make it past 300,000 miles while other owners are already shopping for replacements.